Good afternoon. Welcome you all to the fourth webinar hosting by Civil Department Associate of College of Engineering Pathanapuram. Kindly raise your doubts regarding topic in YouTube comment section and we will be sharing it with Sir and he will clarify it at the end of the session. I am glad lecturer of the webinar Mr. Karthik Nair. He is recognized as a senior planning engineer at Meydan Sobha Construction, Dubai, UAE. He has 12 years of project management experience executing projects in India, UAE, and Qatar. Throughout his professional life, he has gained experience from different project categories like shopping malls, roads, bridges, and underpass, underground tunnel projects, commercial buildings, etc. He is a certified project management professional from PMI USA. Primarily referring the iconic works he executed are Lulu Shopping and AHSO Deep Stormwater Tunnel, which was voted the best global water project for 2017. He is currently working with Meydan One Shopping Mall. Now let's to the webinar. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Srishma. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be taking the webinar class on project lifecycle, introduction to project management basics. Before going into the webinar itself, I'd like to just give an introduction of myself. I believe Srishma has already given a clear explanation. I have a total experience of 12 years. Basically, I've executed projects in India, UAE, and Qatar. So I've handled different projects, buildings, infra. So it's been a mix of different projects in my career. And this presentation is kind of a summarization of my experience in the past. So in this particular webinar on the project management, to give an idea, I'll be first starting with the history of the project management. So like I'll be giving an idea of how project management as a concept came into being. Then I'll go explain what is a project, what is project management, and the parties that are involved in it. Once that is done, we'll go into the details of a project, like how a project starts, is executed, completed, the full cycle of an entire project. I'll be covering. With that, pretty much we'll cover the entire project management. Then we'll go a little bit onto the career options that are there. And finally, if there are any questions, come back and recap the whole thing as per whatever points that come out. So to start on the history of project management. As all of us know, right from the project as such has been there right from when mankind has started building civilizations. So being big, massive projects done, even in the ancient times, we have the Pyramid of Giza, Colosseum, the Pantheon, the Machu Picchu structures in Latin America. Even in the relatively recent period, we've got the Taj Mahal. All of these are big structures, massive structures that were built in different periods. Now, and when projects were being done in the ancient times, a king would simply appoint one of his best people, tell him that I need to build this project. He'll given the concept. And then the best people would be employed to do the projects. The projects were like once in a century. In that scale, projects would be run. So there was time, there were people, the best people were involved in building each of these projects. But as such, there was no scientific basis for how the projects were done. The person who's doing the project, he'll define his own principles, his own ideas to develop the project. There won't be a particular scientific basis for anything that happens. So in the ancient period, in the old ages, that was fine. There was sufficient time, there was money, there was people. So you could take your own time to do the project. But what happened with the Industrial Revolution and all is like there was a huge number of projects that started to be done, increased exponentially. So there were many projects happening parallel. The time started coming down. So you needed to build in 10-story, 20-story buildings in like 2 years, 3-year timeline. So the timeline, all of these became very important things. So sometime in 1911 is a point that is identified as a start of a project management principle. So one Mr. Frederick Winslow is the first person in a treatise on the project management, on the scientific approach to a project. So that is the point that is identified as a start of a project management as such. There's a small video which shows an idea of how this project management came in as per a timeline. So in these, you can see different timelines of the project. Now, the students amongst you who are in the final year and doing the construction management elective would be knowing a couple of terms in this, like the critical path method, PERT, and all. You will come across these terms. The other things like earned value management, critical chain, and all is relatively recent concepts. They are yet to be actually fully used in projects, but these concepts are there. So I'm not going into any of these theoretical parts. I'll try to stick on my presentation to the practical aspects. The theoretical side, you will for sure meet when you do the work, but I would prefer to stick on to the practical aspects, how a project actually is done and things like that, rather than going into the theoretical and too much of a presentation on the theoretical side. So this is about the history of a project, of how the project management as a concept came into being. But fundamentally, I've been saying a lot of the word project, but what is a project actually? Project is basically, in very simple terms, it can be called as something developed to solve a problem. It's a set of processes done to, you have a need, you have a problem, you start a project. That is how a project can be very simply in layman terms defined. So you have a problem, like recently we have the COVID-19 issue. It's been a big problem across all the industries, across all the people. So you have a problem there. The solution for that is finding a vaccine. So to develop a vaccine, you start a project. So that is the concept of a project. So you have a problem, you find a project. So that's how you basically define a start of a project. Now, before going too much into the project and how it is managed and things like that, I'd like to give a small video corner. That is basically my project, current project that I'm working on. So I'm working on the infra side of this project. So this is, previously I was involved in the full structure part of the project also. The reason why I'm playing this video is you can understand and get an idea of why this project and project management as such comes in. See, all of us, even in our home, when we build a home, basically in when we are going to build a home, we won't have project management tools and things like that. That's because it's a small structure. You just call in an ashari and ask him, okay, I need this. This is my requirement, build one. You can do it that way, or you can even call an architect, do a proper plan and do it. But this is all possible for a small project. But when you come to big, massive projects, like there are many people, not just one, there will be many contractors. At that point of time, the scale of everything goes from 1 to 100. So at that point, you need systems, processes, things like that. So this video is just to give you an idea of what we are talking about in terms of the scale of the project. So I hope you will get an idea, and I'll just give you a picture in between. This is basically a mall project that is being built somewhere in the center of Dubai. It is planned as the next major attraction in, so something that is supposed to replace the Dubai Mall. I'm not sure how many of you have seen or been to Dubai Mall, but it's the biggest mall in UAE, Dubai, basically, in UAE. So what you see in the white portion in the front is basically nothing but the fountain. This portion over here is an opening roof. So the concept is during summer, when the heat in Dubai is very high, you close the structure so that you have a ventilate AC controlled environment. And during winter, you open it up, you allow fresh air to come in. You have a kind of a changing mall concept is what they're developing and proposing in this whole thing. There are many destination features in it. There is a lagoon, there's a fountain, there is a ski slope as in the world's longest and biggest ski slope. It's kind of like you have a mountain within the mall. That is the concept. So it's kind of a destination that they're planning for the whole thing, something that is eye-changing. So this is a scale that we're talking about. To clarify, the Lulu shopping mall in Kochi, my first project, that was around 1.5 million square feet of floor area. The Dubai mall is around 5.4 million square feet, around 4 times bigger than Lulu. This mall, the one that I'm currently working on, is 6 square feet. So it's like 5 times bigger than the Lulu mall. So that is a scale that we are talking about. So I played this video just to get you around the idea of what scale we are talking about and understand why these processes and all is important. So going on to the project and definition, project can be simply defined as a temporary endeavor to create a particular unique product. So the important words here is the temporary, that is a project needs to have a start and an end. It cannot be indefinite. A COVID-19 or something like a factory operation, it is indefinite. It does not have a start. It is supposed to go and like continuously. But a project is not, hopefully not supposed to be indefinite. It needs to have an end. There are projects that do not end, that is stopped and things like that. But for a definition or a concept wise, there needs to be an end. Secondly, a project should have to have something unique created from a project. So it's a unique concept. You need to have a building constructed from a project, so, or a vaccine identified. So something unique has to be coming out from. Then there is the attributes like cost, money, and things like that, which is there for everything. So, but a project needs to have these three basic. Once these three requirements are defined or accepted, you say that, okay, this is a project. Building of a house is a project, but maintaining or staying in a project. So that is the difference between a project and a operation, basically. So as I was saying, this is an example of what and what is not a project. So vaccine development and COVID-19 case, we have the COVID-19 developing out from sometime January 2020. And from that point, there are many organizations working to find out a vaccine for this particular disease. But this development of the vaccine is ongoing and continuing. It stops at the point that the vaccine is developed. So there is a start and there is an end. Once a vaccine is developed, you get a unique output. So again, you have a unique output requirement that is satisfied. Then it has cost, all these attributes attached to it. So it meets all the three requirements. So basically, the development of the vaccine can be defined. Once the vaccine is developed, you start the production of the vaccine. So this vaccine is developed for like 7 billion people. It needs to be produced for 7 billion people. So that is a continuous process. You don't see an end for that. So therefore, that production of the vaccine, that can be called as a operation that will be going on. So this is, I just gave this example to explain to you what is the difference between a project and an operation. So once this concept is clear, then what we actually need to understand is why first of all a project happens. So we understand what a project is, but why should someone do a project? So just similar to what we have for the COVID-19 case, there is some requirements that come. So additional. So you get a pandemic that affects nearly the entire world population. So that is a requirement that comes in it, a market need basically. So everyone, or you can also start a project because of some sort of technological advancement. Like you have a factory and suddenly a new technology is developed to produce something in a new method. So you build a new factory to meet this technological advancement. You have an electric vehicle developed. So you have a new technology coming in. So you build a separate factory for that. So you start a project for building the factory. So things like that is what actually drives the start of a project. Without these needs or coming in, generally you don't have a project starting out. So this is just to get an idea of why a project is started and what is a project as such. So I've been talking about projects and why it is required, what is the history and all. But what is basically project management? You have the project. Project is basically, as I said, you have a start, finish, something that needs to solve a problem. But why do you need a management brought into the project? Basically, when you talk about a project, the most important three items for a project is time, cost, and scope. Scope, to define what a scope is the work to be done, your project requirements. Time, you know, cost also we know. So these 3 points, the time, cost, scope, is called as the triple constraint, the most important thing for a project. Project management triangle or a iron triangle, there are different words for these 3 items. It's a kind of considered to be a triangle. So most important things for a project is these 3. When the project management as such comes into picture as a principle of applying management tools. So you use various tools, skills, techniques, and things like that to do a project scope or requirement within these constraints. So that is what is basically project management. So project management is, to very simply say, it is nothing but the application of all of these tools that we have to meet the project objectives within this constraint. So that is what is called as project management. So, but who executes the project. That is something that we need to look at further. So we know what a project is, we know how a project needs to be employed, but who actually does the project? Now, what the picture that I've got is something that I found from the internet, which is pretty interesting. As in, this is how a contractor, myself, I work on a contractor side, how a contractor views a project happening. So you have, in a contractor's frame of mind, he's the one who does all the work. So he's the one who digs all the hole. The client or end user is someone who pays the money. I'll go into details of these things further. But he basically, the contractor sees them as someone standing to the side and enjoying the whole thing. And then the designer is also someone does some work, but who generally does not do it. This is how a contractor sees their system. Entire work happening. But I believe a couple of days back, there was a presentation by Arinjit, who is a friend of mine, who works on a designer side. For him, he does the work. So it is all where, from which point of view you see the whole thing. So for me, I am the person who does all the hard work. So this is something that is like a personal viewpoint, basically. Going on to the details of individually. So all of us, when most of you guys who would have seen or one of your relative working or your own home project, you would know the fundamental three parties involved in it. You would have an architect, someone who is doing the drawings. You would probably be appointing a contractor to do the work. And you would also have yourself or your relative who's doing the building would be the employer. So these 3 points, for a home project, it is very clear. But when we are talking about a major project, like as I explained before, the Meydan 1 mall. So project of this scale, there will be many more parties involved. So fundamentally, you have 3 elements, which is the first one is the employer, client, or the end user. So this is kind of like the king in the project. So they are the people who put in the money, who develops the concept. It is the employer who actually has the building a next mall in Dubai. Or a building, or Sobha would be one of the guys in India. So Sobha would decide they need to build a 20-story apartment building in Cochin. So they are the employer at that point. The employer is the one who put in the money, who will be taking over the legal liability, who will be the final, basically the king of the entire project ecosystem would be the employer. The next level of the hierarchy would be, we'll find the designer or the architect. Now, the designer or architect basically gives the technical expertise in the project. We have many important players like Arcadis, Atkins, Parsons. As I said, Arinjit is one of the designers. So he'll be these companies do the technical part of the entire project work. So the employer, once he develops a concept, he'll share it with the designer. He'll bring in a designer and he'll tell him, see, I need to build this 12-story building. So the designer basically takes that input and he breaks it down further as, so, okay, if you need a 12-story building, you need these many number of piles. You need this much big RAS slab, you need these many beams. So he basically breaks it down to individual elements. He'll prepare the drawings. And once all of this technical work is done, to the contractor. So contractor is kind of like the muscle man and the whole thing. So he'll come in, he'll take this design, and he'll execute the entire project. So I am on the contractor side. So most of my viewpoint would be on the contractor side. So it does not mean that the contractor does not put in any technical input. The contractor develops the designer's plan to a working shop drawing, and it is actually, there is also some technical input. There is also a technical team in the contractor side, but it is pretty limited. The major technical work is completed by the designer. In addition, there are 2 other additional levels which is found in big projects. Now, there is called as a project management office, and also there is a project consultant. Frankly, in all my 12 years career, the only point that I've seen a project management office is like 2 years back. When I came into this 3 years back, basically, when I started the Meydan Mall project. Before that, none of the projects actually had a project management office. What is a project management? Project management office is like a right hand to the employer. That's why I placed it above, between the designer and the employer. So they are kind of like a supervisor for the employer who look at everything. Karyasthan is what you can call him. So he'll be like, he'll tell the employer, okay, there is a problem with the contractor, there is a problem with the designer, they are doing this wrong. So it's kind of that role is held by the project management office. The next level, there is one more level between the designer and the contractor, which is the consultant representative. This is again not necessary to have in every project, but this is kind of like a supervisor for the actual execution of the work. So they come to the site, they monitor the quality, they look at the contractor's claims and things like that. So this is the basic work that the consultant does. Not necessary that every project needs to have all of these elements in picture, but mostly these are there. Now, I believe as engineering students that you're coming out, this structure is something important that you need to understand. Frankly, 12 years back when I was joining up my first project in Cochin Lulu, I had zero idea about this structure. I knew about an employer, I knew about the architect, and I knew that I frankly had zero idea. For me, I did not actually architect. I knew that I did not know to draw. So for me, the best option was contractor. So, and technically, it's not my strong point, frankly. But management side is what a contractor does. So for me, the contractor. I'll go through the details of all of these in the career slide. But again, just to get you a picture, to become very clear, the people amongst you who has a technical idea, who's a little strong on the technical side, who has a clear picture on that, who has their fundamentals pretty strong, who is planning to do the MTech. So people like that, I'll suggest go for the designer, architect, master planner kind of profiles. So that is where you will have more of a technical. You need technical on a contractor side, but so that is what a designer gives a graduate that is coming out. Whereas a contractor, it is more of a management, people skills, people who are good in managing people who are hard workers. It is really tough work on a contractor side. The working out the physical work is more. So all of these things, it is a really tough world. So the number of people hitting you is hard. It is not very easy works, but for some people it is good work. I always find contractor side work more interesting, more challenging. So contractor is also a good work. So I'm not sure if this picture has been pretty clear, but this is what for me, I feel like you all of this concept and this hierarchy pretty clear, and it could help you to take the right career choice is what I believe. At least for me, I would like to have known at least by my third year, because by then it was already late. Now, once you're done with the stakeholders, we go into the details of a project life cycle asset. So what happens in a project? So in this next set of slides, basically we make this webinar. It will be going through a project. So what I'll try to strive in this particular section is to explain how a project grows concept stage to a planning stage where it is broken down, how to execute, everything is decided, and finally to the out of the project. This is the basic flow of a project. So once again, a project can be 4 basic steps. So you have the initiation as when the employee who's deciding, the king in the project, that is the client, decides on doing the project. So he'll see if the project is feasible, whether, say, for example, in the case of Meydan One Mall, there in the initiation phase, Meydan, who is the client, if you remember the video, the first name was Meydan. So Meydan would basically look at how Dubai can take on one more mall project, whether there is scope. So they would have done a huge detailed study to see if there is more scope for building one more mall in this scale. So all of these studies happens in the initiation phase. Mostly on the designer and employer side, works happen at this stage. Once the initiation is done, once they decide, then we move on. They appoint a contractor, a designer, everyone, and they go on to the planning stage. The planning stage is more on the contractor side of works. Also, the execution is again on the contractor side. Both of these things, for me, the most interesting section is the planning side. So planning side is, at that point, it is decided on how to execute the project, where, what sequence to do it, and things like that. I know this entire section is a little boring. It might be a little stretched out, but this is stuff behind a project. So in the planning phase, we do a lot of assessment studies and all to define how to do the project. So I'll play once again a small video. Now this video is what you see on the bottom right corner. There's a small presentation that was done for on a tender level. So tendering is when the contractor is bidding or trying to get the project. So this entire video basically explains how the project is planned to be done. So how they are planning to execute it. So you will get an idea of what sort of work is happening at the planning stage through this video. That is the intention of the video. The video is around 8 minutes long. I won't play the full video. I'll just do somewhere around 2 to 3 minutes in this initial portion so that you get an idea of what I'm talking about when I say planning. So let me just play the video. But before okay, let me just play it. Now, this is not the previous project. This is an entirely different one, which was in Doha, my previous project, not the current one. I'll just stop it at this point. So the why I stopped it is just to give an idea of what is the project about, so that the next, otherwise it might just fly over our head. So this project is kind of like the white line that you see here is actually a 30-meter deep tunnel. The one I think at the starting we had mentioned, in that I had done in Doha. So this tunnel is around 30 meters beneath the ground. Is below the ground is what this tunnel runs through. So this tunnel basically carries all the water in Doha, like rainwater, and not sewage, but all the surface runoff and all. So entire water comes and collects into this tunnel. So this tunnel takes the water and it comes to this point. So here in the yellow, you can see a pumping station. And the purpose of this project is to take this water that is coming through the white tunnel, the sea. So this red line that you see is around 10 kilometers. So the water comes in through the white tunnel. It is collected in the pumping station. The pumping station pumps the around 10 kilometers into the sea. So this is the project that was planned to be done. So from this point onwards, this particular, how this is going to be done. So this is done in the planning stage, so that you get an idea. Once again, I'm stopping here. Basically, why I stopped this what you see over here is the kind of logistics plan that would be done in the planning phase. So basically what is done is like the contractor sits with the entire contractor team, the project manager, construction manager, there would be a logistics manager. Logistics is like which way the trucks are supposed to move, where the offices are supposed to be placed, where the containers will be placed, where will be the cranes positioned, how will we start the excavation. So all these plan is done in the planning phase. So again, this video, the purpose of playing this video is to explain the kind of detail that we go and to understand why this phase is so important in a project. So this is the level of activity detail that might happen during the planning phase. The TPM. TBM is a that is used in metro projects. At this point, I'm stopping the video because again, it's going for another 4 or 5 minutes explaining the entire sequence of how the project is done. So it's really interesting for people who are interested in this sort of works. This is kind of like my best project that tendering work that I've done. So it was really detailed, and so this you get an idea of what sort of level of detail that is done in planning stage. So at this point, you develop the flesh project. So once the planning is done, you execute the project on site, and during execution, you need to have a constant monitoring and control of the work that is happening. Once that is executed, you finally close out the entire project. So this whole series of sequences is called as the project life cycle. From the start as a seed that you put onto the ground, it slowly grows out and finally closes out as a tree that comes out. So this entire process is the project life cycle. The first phase, now I'll be going through each of these phases a little detail, an idea. I won't go too much detail because frankly, I'm not intending to push this project, this entire webinar too detailed. As I said, it's a basics, project management basics presentation. So I'll stick on to the higher level only. So repetition and too much of a theoretical stuff. So first phase of a project would be the initiation phase. This is the point when the employer says, let's start the project. So in the initiation phase, what happens? So this is what happens here is the employer has an idea. In the initiation phase, the idea is converted to a project. That is what happens in an initiation phase, basically. So when an employer has an idea, first he develops a business case. So there are different words used for a business case, but in basic meaning, what it means is it actually defines what is the purpose of the project. So the employer define, for example, Sobha when they plan to do, or Lulu when they plan to do the mall in Cochin, they'll basically develop a business case. So they'll study this is what I'm saying in 2008, basically, when they started the mall. So at that point, they would actually do a study, market study. They'll see what are the malls that are there in Dubai. At that point, there's just, I believe, Obron and Gold Mall just coming up and things like that. There were very few malls in Kochi. So they first developed the business of how this mall, what is being planned and to be achieved through this mall project. Once the business case is developed, they do a feasibility study. So in a basically what they look at the technical feasibility, the financial feasibility, and the market feasibility. Like when Lulu decided to build a mall project in Cochin, they look what is the average footfall that they plan. How many people need to come to make this project a successful project. So that looks at the financial feasibility. Then they look at the technical feasibility. Like, for example, in 2008, if Mr. Yusuf Ali wanted a operable roof in Cochin, it might not have been technically feasible because getting the entire system might be difficult. I'm not saying it is not possible. Anything is possible nowadays, but technically it is not an easy thing to conceptualize. So this level of study is done in the feasibility point of view. Once the feasibility study is done, they go on to define what is the project goals. When I say project goals, like for the Lulu mall, they would define we need a mall that is able to accommodate say 1 million of retail area. So they'll say that we need to have these many shops available, these many parking areas available, these many floors required. This is a timeline that is there. This is my total budget. I have this much money, so build the mall within this much cost. So all these things are defined in the in this particular phase. And then once all these things are done, once the employer decides everything on the project on a conceptual level, on a high level, they appoint the different project actually kicks ahead. So this is the point wherein a contractor, designer, all of these people come in. There would be a designer at the initial phase also. So as I said, all these things is from my experience. Someone else might say, like, you could do the appoint some stakeholders at the starting. So this keeps on, but on a generalized way, this is the flow of activities that happens in the initiation phase. So once at this phase, the project is actually initiated and the project is started. At the next phase, we have the planning. So as I said before in the video that you saw, a lot of work happens in the planning phase. So for the contractor, if you look at the steps that are there, basically they go ahead and define the scope, the time, cost, and resources, and all these things. When I say schedule time, estimate cost, and all these things are done in the initiation phase also. At that day that I need to complete this Cochin shopping mall within 3 years, because 2011 is my opening date. So, but for a contractor, he cannot simply start a project like that. For him to start a project, he needs to identify when he will start the piling for the mall, when he'll complete the piling, when he'll start the first slab of the mold, when he'll start the second slab, when he'll complete the roof, when the finishing will start, when the painting will start. All these things he needs to develop the detailed schedule. That is what happens in the schedule point of view. Once these schedule and estimate what is the detailed cost involved in this thing, so that the contractor always is concerned about cost. He needs to make sure that he does not overshoot the cost. So these things he needs to keep a grip on himself. Then he needs to also have the resources in place, so that to make sure that he does not overshoot on the available resources for the particular project. Resources, when I say, is mostly on the manpower and equipment, like how much labor is required. So if for example, Cochin Lulu project, the contractor Shapuji Pallonji is the contractor where I worked on, who did the work. So when they do the resources point of view, they see that they need 5,000 labor in a month. 5,000 labor in 2008 getting in Cochin was not easy. So they need to plan ahead to get laborers from Bengal, from Orissa, from Karnataka, from Tamil Nadu. So they plan these things ahead. They also in the point of cost. So if they need to do around 20 million of work in a 20 million as in 20 crores of work in a month. So 20 crores or 50 crores of work in a month, the contractor needs to have that much money with him. So all these things is defined and planned in the planning phase. So as far as a project success is concerned, the planning phase can be considered to be the most important and most critical part of the project. Wins or loses the project as far as a contractor is concerned. Just going into the details of each of these steps that I mentioned before, we have the defined scope and the that is done first. So what is meant by, just to give an idea, I'm not going into too much, make it too technical or theoretical, but these are all important words that you might face in the first year of your career. So that's why I'm just explaining these words, so that when you join a company, when your manager asks you what is scope, you should be having an idea what is scope. It shouldn't be like, I did not have an idea, very frankly, but at least I hope after this presentation, some of you would be having an idea. So scope is basically a quantification of the work that is involved. I'll just show you a small table over here. I'm not sure if this table is very clear, but I'll just zoom in. So this is the kind of quantification that happens in a project. Now, this is also high-level quantification, like the number of piles that are there, the length of the pile, what is the decks. This is an infra quantification. Infrastructure work, bridges and tunnels quantification is what is defined in this table. So this level of detailing, the detailing does not make any sense, but this is the kind of level of detailing that we go to. Even more than this, this is actually a high-level summary table. There is a lot of detailing that happens in the defined scope phase. Once the scope is defined, there is something called as the work breakdown structure. Again, this is a word terminology that I like you guys to understand. Basically, work breakdown structure is nothing but, say you got the mall over here. This is the shopping mall that I'm working on, the Cochin shopping, the Dubai shopping mall. In this project, it's a huge project. You see, this is a single crane and this is the entire project. Now, for this particular project, if you say that, let's say facade is the outer like cladding or painting that we do on the outer side of the mall, all around the mall. Now, when we say you'll be doing the facade, it does not make sense. This is such a huge mall. You break it down into smaller portions. The west side facade is comes on one particular side of the mall. The north side facade, one side. So you break it down into the whole project into small components. That breakdown structure is called as the work breakdown structure. I'm not been able to understand, but I hope it is clear. Basically, this breakdown, this entire facade is broken down into west, north, east, south. So that level of breakdown is what is intended through this particular division. I'm not sure if it is clear, but this is, I also don't intend to go into too much details of this, but this is meant to just give you an idea of what we are talking about when we say work breakdown. Once the defined scope is done, what the contractor does next is he goes on to define the define the schedule. So he'll develop the schedule or the program for the project. When I say schedule, what I mean is you can call it a timetable. Basically, it basically tells you when to do what. As I said before, when to start the piling, when to finish the piling, when to start the first slab, when to finish the first slab. Each and every activity in a project has a start date and an end date. Normally, we use tests for that. I work on Primavera. Different projects use different softwares. In India, we used to use Microsoft Project. Many projects, softwares that are possible. But more than software knowledge, the important thing is understanding the important point is to understand the how the work happens. So to define particular elements. In this particular, what you see over here in the side over here is nothing but the how a portion over here is called as a Gantt chart, which shows when each activity starts and each activity is supposed to end. Give me 1 second. Okay, it's fine. I'm not able to zoom into the screen. Anyway, this is how Primavera activity looks like. So I'm sure that you are not able to see what is here, but basically this is individual activities. This is a start date, finish date, and what is the float and things like that is what is defined here. Now this is a high level stuff that happens. I'm not able to zoom in, but this is how it works out. Once the schedule is developed, then you go on to the next step, which is the estimation of the cost. Now, the cost estimation, again, I'm not going into too many details. There is too many things that is explained in these steps, but there is just two things that you need to understand on a very basic level, two words that I'd prefer, and one is indirect cost. So what is a direct cost and what is indirect cost? To give a very simple example, when you're building your house, or when Yusuf Ali is building the Lulu shopping mall, when he is doing a particular piling, for the piling, there would be concrete required. There would be, for the piling, there would be a drilling machine required. There would be steel making the pile. So all these material costs, there would be some laborers involved in doing the work. So all these direct can be attributed to each activity. That is called as the direct cost. Then what is indirect cost? Indirect cost is like cost, say in Lulu, I was an engineer who was working there, but I was not working as such. I was the planning engineer there. I was working for piling, I was working for slabs, I was working even for logistics. So my cost cannot be attributed to one particular activity. So that costs are called as indirect cost. There are different categories of that, examples of that, but this is basically the difference between a direct cost and an indirect cost. What can be attributed to a particular activity is a direct cost. What be attributed to an activity or process is called an indirect cost. There are a lot of other things in the estimation of costing, but I'm not going into the details of that. There is a lot of rate analysis and things like that is there. Again, I'm skipping all to keep it more simpler. Then once, so in the planning phase, once the scope is defined, once the schedule is developed, and the cost is identified, the contractor determines the resources that is required, how much manpower is required, how much equipment is required. So this is again an important phase for a contractor because it basically defines whole setup. So again, there are a lot of things to be known. I'm not going to any of the major things, but fundamentally how it's calculated is what is this formula. You have a quantity that you identified in the scope process, and you have a productivity. What is a productivity? Productivity is nothing like what is the capacity of a person to do a work. Say like you have a mason, or you have a someone who's working on your farmland, and he's supposed to doing the farm seeding of paddy fields. So when you have a farmer working in your farmland, he is able to do, say, 50 square meters of seed planting in one day. That is what he's able to do. That is called as productivity. The capacity of individual units to do basically can be called as productivity. So if you know productivity and if you know quantity, say if you have 1 acre of land, and if you know one person, say this much meter square of plant seeding, then you can easily calculate how many people are required to complete the entire 1 acre plot. This fundamental principle is used for calculating the resources. I'm not going into too many details because it's too complicated for our level of basic project management. Once the resource and the planning, everything is completed, you move on to the execution phase. The execution phase, one thing that needs to be remembered, it is not a standalone phase. Execution phase moves in parallel to the planning. The planning actually overlaps with the execution phase through the control and monitoring process that happens. So once the planning is done and the contractor starts with the execution, there is a lot of work that happens at that point. So basically, a lot of work that happens. Basically, what happens is the contractor, when he starts working, say if he's doing a 10-month project, after he completes 5 months, he needs to make sure that he's completed 50% of the work. It can be 50 or whatever is planned in the previous stage. So if there is a deviation from the two, he needs to understand that and correct his progress. Slipping or if he's ahead, so he needs to understand these things. So there needs to be a constant monitoring of the entire project progress. Without that, every project will fail for sure, and that is where the planning, like basically my job, comes into picture during the execution phase. So we constantly what is happening and how the progress is supposed to move on. Okay, so once that is done, now this is just an idea of what are the two tools that are used for this monitoring and tracking. You have a KPI tracker, whereas you have the planned line, you have the actual line. You see what is the difference. Or you could use a milestone tracker where the end dates, when is the piling supposed to complete, when is the raft slab supposed to complete. So you have to look at and monitor the progress. This is just two commonly used tools, but there will be n number of tools possible. So this is the entire execution part of the project that happens. So once the project is executed, you do everything. You finally complete the project. So this itself is actually a process. You don't simply complete a project and give. Say if you're building a house, you don't simply complete it. There would be housewarming ceremony. There would be people coming to see the house. The contractor would come to take pictures to show to his next client. So a lot of processes happens in the closing out phase. So this is also an important phase as far as the project is concerned. So all of these things, like once the physical work is done, the handing over and lots of similar steps happen at this phase. Now, with this, pretty much we cover the entire project cycle. So I've explained how a project starts, how it is planned, how it is executed, and how it is finally completed. I could go a little more detailed on each of these things, but that would become too technical. I believe I pretty much covered for a basic level what is involved in a project and a project management, how it might help you, what is the structure. Some of the key points that I would prefer you guys to understand about is the stakeholder chart that I was mentioning. In my opinion, that is pretty important, need to understand. So I'll just go now with this. I'm pretty much closing out the webinar, but then one of the last slides that I mentioned is what are your career options. So in terms of career options, actually in the initial part, when I was planning about this project management webinar, I was also thinking about a slide on the impact of COVID on the current market scenario. But being very frank, and with all of these current situations, I actually deleted that slide. Basically, it is speculation. No one knows what is going to happen. But I am a person who believes that it might turn better at any time. Say for Dubai, pretty much everything is starting up, opening up. People are going back to work. Changes are happening. It's a tough time for you guys. It'll be a tough time. But as I said before, this you can use it for a better option. You can use it to do your higher studies. You can use this time to do some courses. You can even start on projects. Start from the ground. This actually you can use it positively, and I'll suggest that you guys do it on a positive tone. Now, this is the options for the career options that I've got on a project management style. Why I put forward this slide is because when I was, as I said, I think I've said it before, but when I started my career, I just knew that I need to be in a contractor because technically I was not strong. So I knew that I need to go for a contractor job. But I did not know what is there in a contractor job. For me, contractor, what I've seen in movies and all, is a site engineer. I'll be a site engineer. Okay, in site engineer, okay, site engineer, that was my thought process. That was how I was actually planning to go. But when I joined the company only, I realized that no, site engineer is just one options that I have, even on a contractor. The contractor has different actually departments, different specializations. It is not just a site engineer. One part of the big, he's an important part for sure. That's why all these cinemas, all the stories and all focus on the site engineer, because he's the one who does the work. But all the other departments are equally important, equally challenging, and equally interesting. So when I joined the company, I actually then learned about these things. And luckily for me, I got the option in Shapur because they were training all these GETs as through all of these departments, and they give us a choice to pick the department. But this is not available for everyone. So what I'll suggest is you guys need to know these things, and this you can develop on these particular departments. So just to give you an idea, there is on a construction site, that is in the site, you have options to be a site engineer, project manager. All of these are options. But this is basically site-based work, really hard work. You'll have to be in the sun, you'll have to be in the labor, it's a tough job, but it is one of the most challenging, interesting, and you building something. You feel like basically a father who's nurturing a kid up. So that is the kind of feeling that you gain when you do a project engineer or site engineer job. I had a small period when I worked engineer, so for me it was not an easy job. I'll say it is the toughest job that is there for a civil engineer. But again, some people it really works out. So that is one option that you have on the construction side. Then there is the support departments. When I say support, what I mean is the contracts, commercial, planning, tender, and things like that. So I haven't actually mentioned contracts department. Contracts come with the quantity survey. So they actually write all the contracts, all the legal, they look at the legal and aspects of the project and things like that. So that happens in the quantity survey and contracts department. Similarly, there is a planning and cost control department, which basically looks at the time and cost aspect of the project, which is very important for a contractor. So these are, although I mentioned them as support departments, they have their own hierarchy and growth path. You can be a 60-year-old planning head. You can be a specialist planning consultant. You can be a planning claims consultant. So these are all lifelong career paths available. But a planning engineer can also shift to a project manager of a project. So that movement is also possible and encouraged. So this is like, or individually also you can go ahead. So you can go on a functional level also. Then you have the technical. On the technical side, you can go on to be again, this is for the people who are strong technically and who wants to join. You can join a designer or an architect and become a technical engineer. That is possible. Similarly, a contractor also does a lot of technical job. So for that, they need technical engineers, structural engineers, road engineers. All these people are there also for a contractor. So you can experience and develop yourself a quality engineer, because there are specific people to ensure that the quality is maintained inside. There are safety engineers. This is there on the technical side. Then there is a business development, people who have a business savvy skill, who are a marketing skill. So these people are there in business development. So these are the options that you have on a career point. Now, I'm not sure that I pretty much covered the entire thing. If there is some points that needs to be stressed, cleared, and all, you can get back to me. So I believe I'm done with the presentation as such. If there is any particular point that I think I've taken just around 1 hour. So if there is something that we added in, or questions or something, or I need to explain something, you are free to let me know.
Thank you, sir. So now we come to doubt clearance session. So first question is, which is the best path to become a project manager just after BTech?
Okay, now I'll just go back to career slide to explain that point. So if you need to be a project manager, this is the project manager. So you can be a planner, for example, to be a project manager. Project manager is kind of like, you can call him as a jack of all trades. He needs to know everything. The best project manager is someone who knows something about everything. He does not need to know everything about everything. He shouldn't also know something. He needs to know something about everything. Like, he needs to know about time. He needs to know about cost. So ideally, the best path, in my opinion, would be planning to project manager. That's because I'm a planner. But for a BTech guy, I'll suggest, if you are looking at a project manager role, start from a site. You learn in the site. You do a site experience, and from that point, you go on to 4-5 years of project site engineer. You can shift from that to a planning or quantity survey or technical or one of the other departments. It's very difficult, but there are some really successful people who have done that. And people that get to know very detailed about site experience, they also gain some technical or planning experience, and then they go on to, like, 10 years down the lane, they become a project manager. These are what I'll call a successful project manager. People who have, those people become really, really good project managers. So my opinion is, so to explain answer the question, work in more than one departments, ideally starting with site and then going on to one of the other departments.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to next question. Which software is best suitable for project scheduling?
Now that is a tough option. You have many softwares. You have the Primavera, Microsoft Project and all. I personally prefer Primavera because you have a lot more options to work on it. But if you are it depends on the type, on the scale of the project. If it's a small one, say if it's a 5-story or a small project without too many parts in it, I prefer Microsoft Project because it's more simpler. It is similar to Excel. But if it's a big lot of activities, many contractors working, then I'll go for Primavera. So it depends on the project, but ideally one of these, Microsoft Project, or there are many other projects, softwares, but these two are the industry leaders as far as Middle East and Indian market is concerned.
Thank you, sir. Next question is, what's the biggest mistake you have made on a project?
Okay, now that is a good one. Everyone makes lots of mistakes. I've made, God knows, when I've been in planning, the mistakes that you make are all correctable mistakes. Like, you might wrongly estimate a time. All those things you can correct. But as I said in my webinar, at some time I was actually a site engineer. So I shouldn't actually say this in an open forum, but there is something that I did as a mistake when I was a site engineer. I was in charge of a particular work. I'm not going into specifics because I'm also not sure if the liability is still over. But when I was in charge of a particular work, let me say it on being a little non-specific, I actually poured the wrong grade of concrete for a particular work. So when I poured it, I went to my, clear. So I could have just kept quiet. No one actually identified it. I could have kept quiet and said, okay, everything is good. But I don't believe in that. So once I realized that I made it's a massive problem. So you got a particular, say, if you're building a column or a wall, if you are pouring a wrong grade of concrete, that is, the concrete does not have the strength to what it is designed for, it can actually crash, it can fall down. So, and I was just starting my career. So it was in the first year of my career. So I did not sleep for that night. It happened in the night. I went back to my home and I realized just before I slept that this happened. The next day morning, I came back and I told the project manager, this has happened. And then there was obviously a lot of problems, but finally it was solved out. But everyone makes mistakes. Come clear, tell your superiors did this thing. Even when you're studying, you guys will make a lot of mistakes. I'll suggest come clean. That's the best way. And then you can solve any problem. There is no problem that does not have a solution. So you can find a solution. So this is my biggest mistake that I still actually have a problem with. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, sir.
Next.
Next question. If the project is not adhering to schedule, how do you get it back on track?
It's a good question, actually. I did not go into this point, actually, but this is something that is pretty important for a planner. It's something called as, there are two words that I need to just specify. One is called as the fast tracking, and the other is called as acceleration. These is two methodologies that is done to bring a delayed project back into schedule. Fast tracking is like to give building your house. So you have given invitation to your relatives saying that, okay, I'll do the housewarming on end of June. 30th of June is my housewarming, and you invite your relatives. But you go to the contractor and you tell him, see, I'm going to invite my relatives on 30th of June. The contractor tells you, sir, it is not possible. He needs another 10 days. So you tell him, no, I need it on 30th of June. So he has two options. One is fast tracking, one is acceleration. Fast tracking is when he decides, okay, he needs to do the painting. He also needs to fix the, say, windows. Ideally, what he'll do is he'll fix the frame of the window, finish the painting, and then he'll come back and fix the glass and things like that. Now, if you are really pushing for the work to be completed, he needs to buy time. So what he'll do is he'll do both of these things in parallel. So he'll complete the painting all around the window. He'll go out and he'll do the rest of the painting. And while he's doing the rest of the painting, he'll do the installation of the window. This is an example of fast tracking. So basically, you're not putting anything additional. You're just using your brain activities in parallel. Another option is called as acceleration. In that process, you're basically putting additional people, money, and it is X1, and you're bringing the project faster. So acceleration is kind of like, crashing, it's also called as crashing, is when you tell the same thing to your contractor, you need it by 30th of June, contractor says not possible. At that point, the contractor says, I'll do one thing, I'll bring in 5 more laborers from West Bengal, they'll come in and I'll put in more people, I'll put in more material, and so the painting that was supposed to take 10 days now takes 5 days. That process, you crashing everything, that is called as acceleration. These two are the processes through which you can fast track a project and bring it in schedule. A really detailed, complex, complicated process that happens. A lot of claims, cost impact is there, but I'm not going into any of those details. Highly, this is the answer to what you asked for.
Thank you, sir. Next, Divyam's question is, you have worked in projects in both Kochi and Dubai. How did the two of them differ based on constraints met by the project management team?
Again, a good question. These questions are really interesting. So how Cochin and Dubai different? You can say Dubai, Middle East entirely. Yeah? The basic differences in Cochin, the major point for a project manager, simple constraints, what I explained in the starting, time, cost, scope. In Cochin, nowadays, the scope does not vary much. You build similar malls. Yes, size might be smaller, but again, it's pretty interesting project. So the scope is not much of a difference. but the time and cost is a major difference. Cochin Lulu shopping mall was done somewhere in 4 years. The current project that I'm working on, the planned duration was around 3 years. It might be complete in around 4 years. The size of the project is around 5 times. So if the same project was supposed to be done in the same rate of, it would have taken this. So what I'm saying is like this time is really short in Middle East. You do everything double or triple faster. To do that, that I'll go into later. Then the cost part. The cost again, the entire project for Cochin Lulu shopping mall was like 450 crores, whereas the current project that this what I'm the shopping the thing like 5 billion dirhams. Now the cost is also really different. In India, things are cheaper. Everyone looks at the cost very important. Time is less important. Here, cost is less important and time more important. Also, one major other difference is in India, labor is cheap, really cheap. Equipment is costly. In Middle East, equipment is cheap, labor is costly. So, for a project management point of view, these are the major differences.
Thank you, sir. Next question is by Pooja. How did you deal when you are underperforming?
Is this an interview? Okay. But that is again a good question. So, when I was underperforming, okay. Yeah, it was tough. I've underperformed. The biggest problem is you never know when you're underperforming. You might know more than your colleagues and your peers and your seniors would know more than you. So what I'll suggest is keep a constant communication channel open with everyone. Be very everyone. So when you are underperforming, you need to know that you're underperforming, as simple as that. Without knowing, you cannot do any corrective action. So when I was underperforming, frankly, what I did is I basically shifted from India to Middle East. That is what I did. But other than the funny side, you need to pull up your pants and do work. I don't think there is anything specific else that you can do. But important thing is you need to understand when you're underperforming, and for understanding that, you need to talk to people. Way that you can know that you are underperforming your work, especially your seniors, your peers, and people who beneath you at all levels.
Thank you, sir. Last question is by Midun Shankar. Based on your experience, do you think that MTech in construction management will add value to a career in contracting?
Okay, now that is a little. Okay, now this is a question that is subjective. Some people will say yes. I, on the other hand, personally, I will say it depends. Construction management as such gives you an idea, gives you a theoretical basis. So all the things that I've skipped in this presentation, or what I did not go into detail, is what details out in a construction management experience. A person, if you two candidates, one person who's worked for 2 years in site in a pretty good project, a challenging project, if he's worked well, and another person who's years in construction management, and if both the candidates come to me, I might pick the guy who's done 2 years of site experience, because on a contractor side, sometimes or most experience or practical experience plays a bigger role. Again, this is again subjective. I'm being really generalized, free when I say this thing. It is not necessary. I've seen some really great guys. I've worked with I am working with some really great guys who've done their construction management and come in, but there are also cases without that. So it's subjective, but I would lean a bit more on a person only construction management. I'm not talking about anything else. Just talking about construction management. I might lean a little bit on a guy who uses that 2 years for working. Construction management, I believe that you can do it as a management, you can do it in parallel to your working through correspondence or something else. That should be enough, is what I believe. It's little subjective. And I think that's it.
Thank you, sir. Hope we covered almost all relevant questions within time. So much, sir. It's really great that this webinar turned out to be very successful. We would like to express our sincere gratitude to Karthik, sir, for taking such an excellent. The lecture was very interesting and informative, and especially your way of taking class was exemplary. Once again, we thank you, sir, for having spared your precious time for all of us. Thank you all for your cooperation and participation. We will be back with our next paper, June 2020, presented by Mr. Vaishak G, Assistant Engineering, PWD Roads